with that, I want to get started, and I want to give Lou the mic and an opportunity to present. And she's going to have translation, so thank you guys all for supporting me.
Gracias por estar aquí, gracias por apoyar esta lucha.
Thank you for being here and thank you for supporting this struggle.
En este momento en el que el gobierno de Trump, Pence y Sessions están articulando ataques en contra de la comunidad inmigrante.
So at this moment, the government of Trump, Pence, and Sessions is accelerating attacks against the immigrant community.
Por medio de enforzar las leyes migratorias, firmar prohibiciones de viaje para países por razones religiosas.
Pushing for new immigration laws, preventing immigration based on religious criteria.
La terminación de programas de protección como el TPS y la decisión de terminar DACA.
And ending programs like TPS and the DACA programs.
Comparando a estos jóvenes como pandilleros, cuando los jóvenes han dado ejemplo de esfuerzo, trabajo y estudio, y siempre han dado un extra, sabiendo que este país los obliga a luchar más.
And then trying to paint the immigrant youth as gangsters, when it's to the contrary, these youth are about studying, about work, about effort, and knowing that being immigrants, they have to do even more.
Y ellos luchan más, pero tienen menos oportunidades que sus amigos, compañeros o hermanos nacidos aquí.
So even with more effort, they have less opportunities than their comrades, friends, people who are born here.
Porque este sistema tan injusto permite que existan familias separadas por un papel.
Because this unjust system allows that families be separated by a paper, by a legal paper.
¿Dónde está la igualdad y democracia que se consigna en la Constitución?
Where is the freedom and equality that's called for or spoken about in the Constitution?
Este régimen está basado en la inequidad, en la discriminación.
This system is basing itself on inequality and on discrimination.
Hemos confiado en las buenas intenciones de congresistas y nos han defraudado una y otra vez.
We have relied on the good intentions of the Congresspeople, and they have defrauded us time and time again.
Y no han querido hacer un compromiso de enfrentar y parar a este gobierno, ya que puede peligrar su capital político.
And they have stopped from really confronting this government, worried about how it could affect their political capital.
Y han dejado a la deriva a más de 800,000 jóvenes y en las sombras a otros cientos de miles de jóvenes que ni siquiera pudieron aplicar al programa DACA.
They have cast aside the 800 who are part of DACA and hundreds of thousands others who hadn't even applied to DACA.
Tal vez para muchos no es comprensible el miedo de las personas inmigrantes, porque no han sentido el miedo de salir a su casa y no saber si podrán regresar.
It may be hard for some people to understand the kind of fear that people live with, the fear of leaving your house and not knowing if you're going to be able to return home.
No saber si van a poder ver a sus hijos y sus hijos, si sus padres van a poder llegar a recogerlos a la escuela.
To not know if you're going to be able to see your children again or if you're going to be able to pick them up from school again.
Personas que han pasado 30, 40 años en este país y no tienen un estatus y de la noche a la mañana son deportados.
People who've been living here 30, 40 years and they don't have a definite status, and overnight they find themselves deported.
Hombres, mujeres, jóvenes y niños viviendo bajo el terror de una separación, dejando familias fracturadas o enviadas al riesgo de perder su vida en sus países.
Men, women, and children facing their families being fractured and ending up in countries that they don't really know.
Países a los que este país ha saqueado, apoderándose de sus recursos naturales y de sus riquezas.
These are countries that the U.S. government, the U.S. has sacked, taking control of the resources and the wealth of those countries,
Pero desprecia a la gente.
but not valuing the people.
Como ya lo mencionó Trump, porque no vienen de Noruega.
Why? Because as Trump said, they don't come from Norway.
Por si alguien todavía duda de que este es un régimen de supremacistas blancos,
If anyone doubts that this is a white supremacist government,
una y otra vez los ataques en contra de las familias inmigrantes se repiten. Ahora vienen por nosotros, los inmigrantes. No esperes a que vengan por ti para empezar a salir y solidarizarte y protestar. Este es el momento.
now they're coming for the immigrants with these new attacks. So don't think that you can avoid this. We have to go out there and confront them. This is the time to act.
I want to make sure to let folks know that after the presenters, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And I want to encourage folks to ask questions, comments, engage with what the presenters are talking about here. Thank you. So next we have, like I said, Sarah Rourke,
Yes.
who was on the steering committee of Refuse Fascism, and also Hillary Kratz. she was on, you were on the campaign volunteer for Hillary 2016.
Yes.
And you know, it's been a really remarkable thing to have specifically Sarah in Refuse Fascism, because it really shows that what we need to build is a broad movement of all kinds of people. And that means when we say bringing together Democrats and anarchists and communists and regular community folks and students and all those things, we really mean it. And this sister has really shown what time it is, and that from her perspective, she sees the need to step up in a very bold way.
I apologize in advance for my laryngitis. I want to highlight one of the strong points that Lulu just made in her presentation, which is that this is going on now. If you listen to the talking heads, some of them very respected in the mainstream media that is under attack by the Trump regime, but also has its own sins in this to account for, you will read that Trump is largely a failed presidency, defined by what he hasn't been able to do. They look at things like the failure to repeal Obamacare. Of course, Obamacare is now getting sabotaged by other means. They forget that he has two other branches of government to play with, and he has been playing with them. And these raids are happening now, and I'm going to actually start with the end of the piece that I wrote last night, trying to crystallize my thoughts for today, because it's so easy in this context to lose all the stars in this ill-starred constellation. Things happen fast and furious every day. That I'd forgotten about Sally Yates getting fired. I'd totally forgotten about it. That was years ago, right? So I want to just take a moment to mention a few of the things this regime has done to immigrants and plans to do. DOJ has published a report claiming that 3 out of 4 terrorist crimes in this country are committed by immigrants, which is simply not true. They are counting people who are extradited to the U.S. to stand trial for terrorism as immigrants. I don't know where their law dictionary is at, but that's not an immigrant. So we already have Jeff Sessions and the head of DHS lie to promote this agenda. And you watch how it will be used. Especially with Fox putting out so many stories about immigrants killing, raping, doing terrible things to native-born Americans. That's all part of the program. ICE and DHS have announced they're exploring options to criminally charge mayors and governors who enforce sanctuary policies. TPS has been revoked for hundreds of thousands of refugees. And the question of saving or reviving their protections has already pretty much dropped off the radar. It's not even an item under discussion in the current immigration negotiations. Shithole countries, not like Norway. Enough said. We got upset about the language. We need to get much more upset about the meaning and the fact that it is directly tied to action. Random stops of people sitting on buses and trains in domestic, not international rides, domestic bus rides within the 100-mile zone inside of our borders. They got a Jamaican grandmother who had just met her grandchild for the first time, came here legally, overstayed her visa. They dragged her off the bus and disappeared her into a detention center for days. These are the terrorists. The establishment of the Voice Hotline for victims of crime committed by immigrants, which has apparently mostly been used by people pursuing personal grudges against exes and things like that, people they don't like. All of which has led landlords and employers to feel emboldened to use deportation as a threat against their employees, against their tenants. Trump has just ordered a national vetting center to be constructed and run. I know. What the hell is a national vetting center? I don't know, but I'm sure extreme vetting is going to happen there. And it would be a joke, except that it's happening. Arbitrary arrests of people whose only crime is the illegal entry or the visa overstay. That has gone up very, very sharply, and it is no longer dismissible as a mistake. Non-arbitrary arrests specifically of immigrant rights activist leaders, like Robbie Rockbeer in New York. 2 New York City councilmen were thrown around by the police and arrested at a protest for his release. Abuse, including sexual abuse of immigrants in detention centers, forced pregnancy of teenage detainees, arrests at places considered off limits like schools, as you said, courts, mandated court appearances, the 7-Eleven raids. I'm going to start skipping over some here. Actually, I'm going to have to skip over a lot of these. Chain migration, the weaponization of this phrase, which we call family reunification, and also the way that everyone except for Native Americans and African Americans even got to this country. Asylum, people pleading for asylum at the border, being sent back, sometimes to their deaths. There was a woman murdered by her husband shortly after she was turned back from the border. And then we have the negotiations over immigration, where DACA kids are being used as a bargaining chip. I'm going to try and speak later on to how this is being used as a wedge issue, a crowbar, an excuse that is eventually going to widen out, not just to all undocumented immigrants, not just to all legal immigrants, but to immigrants, period, and eventually to anyone with the wrong accent, the wrong clothes, the wrong skin color, the wrong national origin. This is the agenda, and I will do everything I can to make the point that this is happening. That is their plan. It is being pursued. It is being succeeded at, and it will be followed, as the Niemöller quote so eloquently says, by attacks on further groups until none of us are free.
You know, my brothers and sisters on the panel have said it all, right? So you're going to keep hearing the same thing over and over again, because it's super important for us to make sure that that becomes our normal. Because what is happening now, they want us to believe that this is the normal, and it's not okay. I don't understand why we aren't out in the streets every single day. I don't understand why we aren't more angry than what we are. I see this beautiful pool of people sitting out here, and I know all of you are dedicated to the change. Now we just need to get 10 more of each of us, and 10 more of that, and 10 more of that, until we are the millions in the streets, because this genocide is not going away, right? This country was built, quote unquote, on the backs of a lot and many people of color. And here we are, we made the country, even our brothers and sisters that aren't here legally made this country, working hard, doing jobs that nobody else wants to do to uphold their own dignity and their families. Now we do shit like get on trains and being asked for our papers. That's apartheid. Right. That's part of this elimination of us people. Right? I see a lot of white brothers and sisters out there in this audience. And I know that your hearts are pure because you're here to do the work. And we need you. But we also need you to take that extra step and get the backs of the brown and black people and say, this is enough. We are tired of this bullshit. This is enough.
Yeah.
It's emotional for me because it just takes me back. It triggers me because my grandmother was the daughter of a slave. Grandmother. She died at 106 a couple years ago. And she remembers at 2 years old. 2 years, she said. She was 2 years old, and she told us stories on how her mother used to cry all the time because she didn't know if she was free or not, even though people were saying, you're free, go home. Go home to where? And do what? How does that sound familiar to what's going on right now? You're free, but you're not free in this country any longer. We beat the shit out of you. We took everything we can from you and your soul, and you worked your asses off to make the base of this country. Now go home. Right? So that's very familiar language. And if you hear the language of what's going on now, chains. Right?
Yeah.
Hello? I'm very familiar with the word chains. Right? Deportation. Centers. It brings you back to our Japanese brothers and sisters. It brings you back to our Native brothers and sisters. It brings you back to our black brothers and sisters and our brown brothers and sisters of today.
Talk about it.
March 5th is on our backs, people. Every single day we should have been out in this street like we were for the Women's March.
Yeah.
Right? Millions of people across the country going out for one day of the year. And I'm not putting that down because that is beautiful and that is power and that is showing them that it is not done. Right? That we are out here and that we are, sorry, my back's to my brother, that we are strong people and we're going to keep our message out there, but we got to do this and keep doing this in numbers. Right? So March 5th is coming up. What are we going to do? There's brilliant brains in this room right now. Brilliant brains in this room right now. What are we going to do? We have a couple options. We can mass gather in front of 630 Sansom on that day,
ICE headquarters.
Yes.
which is the ICE headquarters. We can mass gather at Richmond in the detention center. Take a chance of getting arrested because that's what she showed you. There's some sort of line that you cannot cross. I don't know if you saw their video yesterday. They went there and produced it live and was immediately approached and told not to go past a certain area. What the hell? That's our tax dollars. We should be able to go up to that fence. We should be able to see what's going on behind that fence.
Right.
We should be able to know why it's a beautiful day and nobody's out in that courtyard. What the hell? Are they being fed? Are they being damaged? Because we already fucked them up mentally. So we have to decide what this means to us. We have some options. We have some short-term options and we have some long-term options. Our short-term options are March 5th and March 8th, International Women's Day. Our long-term options are getting ready for the midterms and changing the complexion. Is that an earthquake? You didn't feel it? Okay, maybe it's me.
You're riled up.
Maybe that's what it was with me. But, you know, so we shouldn't leave this room without having some action. That's what I'm just trying to say. Because I'm not going to repeat what my brothers and sisters have to say because their words are very strong and powerful. But I do want to say that we should not leave this room without knowing what our next action is.
Before I give the mic over to this brother right here, I want to just throw out so that folks are thinking about the questions that we are confronting. That the folks that are presenting up here are putting out powerful calls. They are linking the history of this country together with this understanding that we are in present day genocide. They are talking about the vilification of our brown immigrant youth, calling them gangsters and daily terrorizing people to create the grounds so that they can round up and ethnically cleanse. We see the rolling over of the democratic process that we've all come to depend on, that's supposed to serve people, as Sarah said, using these youth as bargaining chips instead of actually fighting for them. And you know, what is before us are these questions that we put out. Is this ethnic cleansing? Is this genocide? What moment is this? And if it is that moment, what is our obligation and responsibility, right? That these are not just questions that we are thinking about. They have everything to do with the future of humanity. That is what this attack on immigration is at this point. It is the beginning of their full-on assault on humanity.
Hi, everyone. So, November 9, 2016, a lot of us looked around and said, what the hell just happened? What the hell is going to happen? And then, after that first sucker punch, many of us started asking, what is my place in this? What can I do? Shortly thereafter, we and a lot of other people who felt as we did formed Stand Up San Francisco. The notion was that the one thing that citizens of conscience have the liberty not to do is nothing. I haven't quite said it this way before, but the idea behind this kind of engaged citizenry is that complacency is complicity. And it became clear that that applies not just to us as citizens of this nation, that it applies especially to our elected representatives. That they need to be shown and told and reassured and emphasized that complacency, while this flavor of fascistic impulses playing out, complacency on their part is complicity. And Stand Up San Francisco's job is to let them know that on a regular basis with wisdom and with conviction. So our job is to encourage, cajole, educate, demand that those we have chosen to represent us take the strongest possible stand in resistance to the Trump agenda. We're doing it on a weekly basis. We're doing it repeatedly. We're doing it having done our homework with the folks whose job it is to speak up for the people in this room, whose job it is to speak up for those who are typically not listened to. Now, in our case, in this city, in this congressional district, we're talking about 3 remarkable women who come with their own history, their own agendas, their own goals, and their own baggage. It's our job as an engaged citizenry to cut through that and go to Dianne Feinstein, who is a well-established democratic machine player, who is a fan of well-functioning Senate structure, and say, no, not right now. There are things more important than a well-functioning Senate. It's our job to go to Nancy Pelosi, who has a long history as a leader of the Democratic Party and is a former Speaker of the House of Representatives, and say, no, this is more important than teamwork. This is more important than the viability of the Democratic caucus, so that she can stand up in the House chamber for 8 hours and speak the way she spoke the other day. It is our job to go to Kamala Harris, who is the very impressive new kid on the block and is building for herself a national profile, and say, no, these principles, the humanity of people who are being thrown under the bus, is more important than you appealing to the center of the electorate. And to say to all 3 of these women, you work for us, and if you recognize and fight for the humanity of the people who are being marginalized right now, we will have your backs. And if you don't, we will stay on your backs. That's what Stand Up San Francisco, as an engaged citizen activist group, has been doing since December of 2016, with the several hundreds of people who now work with us. So I'm here as 1/3 of the leadership team of Stand Up San Francisco, and in fact we have 2/3 of the leadership team here. We're the quorum. So let me hand this over to Rachel Chalmers, and she can talk a little about the angle where she's coming to this work.
As you can hear from my voice, I'm not from around here. I was born on Eora land in the Ku-ring-gai country of Australia. So on one level, Trump might look at me and think I'm practically as good as a Norwegian. But Australia is not Norway. Australia is indigenous land. It always was. It always will be. So when people tell me to go back home, I also have to say, where do you mean? My people's indigenous land was actually expropriated during the enclosure of the commons in the 18th century. And it's worth remembering that because Lulu hit the nail on the head. If you connect the dots between all of the fortified borders in the world, they form a shape. They form a fortress around the rich world. And the rich world isn't rich because it's smart. It's not rich because white people are better than other people. It's not rich because it's special. It's rich because it expropriated the wealth of people in the poor world. And in many cases, it expropriated the people themselves in chains as slaves. So I passed my naturalization test in January. I had, in many ways, the best possible case of migration to the United States. And one of the gifts of being a migrant is the ability to see through different eyes. And that's been a huge privilege. How many of you were actually surprised when Trump won the election? Yeah, you're all white. I was not surprised. I moved here in 1998. I have lived here 5 years longer than ICE has existed. I applied for my green card in the wake of 9/11. It took 6 years to come through. I started my citizenship process when my daughter was 6 weeks old. She is 15, and I just passed my naturalization test. Now, there are 2 things you can do with the unearned privilege that I have with my white skin and my education and my having English as my mother tongue. You can punch down and you can say, well, I obeyed all the rules. I did everything legally. I worked really hard. I deserve to be here. Or you can punch up and say, you know what? I came here to improve my family's opportunities. I came here because I believe in the promise of America, the real promise of America, the promise that's written on the Statue of Liberty. I came here because I believe that the US Constitution is special and unique in history. And that makes me exactly the same as illegal immigrants. It makes me exactly the same as the DACA kids and the DREAM kids. It makes me exactly the same as the holders of the TPS status. There's no difference between me and them except the color of my skin, which is skin deep. So to me, this is incredibly personal, and I'm not just talking about the week I spent under my desk crying after the Muslim ban, because they were taking people's green cards away. I got my green card so that my family could stay together, so that my husband wouldn't be deported. Every time I crossed a border, I knew that I could have everything taken away from me. And I am white and rich and educated. It is much worse for my black and brown brothers and sisters. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I fight.
I'm an immigration attorney. I've been an immigration attorney since 1985. I've worked with rapid response networks. I did amnesty cases back in the 80s. Mostly I did asylum and deportation defense. I'm retired now, but I still work volunteering in immigration law. I was going to give you a kind of 5-minute summary of immigration law with reference to the particular programs that are under attack now. Do we have time for that? Because, okay. So if you don't mind, I'm going to look at my notes. U.S. immigration law has always been an arm of U.S. foreign and economic policy, despite laudable humanitarian elements. Before 1965, immigration laws were explicitly exclusionary and racist, favoring Northern Europeans and banning certain nationalities, beginning with the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. The 1965 immigration overhaul aimed to level the playing field for the first time in U.S. history. Each foreign country was relegated the same number of immigrant visas, and there were 2 types of immigrant visas. One was a work visa. This generally had to be a petition by a U.S. employer, and that U.S. employer had to prove that there were no available Americans that could do that work, and they had to do it by advertising the job. There was a whole procedure. The other half of it was family reunification. This is what's now mischaracterized as chain migration. Family unification, of course, benefited people that already had immigration status in this country. If you were a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, you could petition for immediate relatives. However, if it was something like siblings, the wait for these kind of visas, and you could only do it as a U.S. citizen, could be something like 10 or 15 years. There was never any way that you could get your whole family here or your whole family here quickly. I mean, this has not changed in 50 years. You could get a spouse here, you could get a minor child here quickly if you are a U.S. citizen. If you're a legal permanent resident, you may have to wait years and years and years. And it doesn't extend as Trump and Republicans have said, to miscellaneous relatives down the line. In the 1970s and the 1980s, as the US economy heated up and civil wars and coups in Central and South America brought thousands of migrants north to the US, there were 2 major policy responses. One was political asylum. This was granted primarily to immigrants that were fleeing, or to migrants that were fleeing from leftist governments. And I'll give you an example. I did asylum cases in the 1980s. We had Salvadorans, we had Nicaraguans, we had Guatemalans, etc. Only 1% of the Guatemalan asylum cases were granted. 3% of the Salvadoran cases were granted, and 50% of the Nicaraguan cases were granted. These were the Somocistas, or those with sympathies to the Somocistas who were fleeing at that time. In the mid-1980s, there was what was called an amnesty. And this was partially so that US employers, particularly farm owners and corporations, could get a stable farm working population that they could keep on the farms. And so there was a farm worker amnesty where if you had worked during particular years for 3 months and could prove that, then you could gain permanent residency. Of course, given the conditions on those farms, a lot of people that gained residency that way, as soon as they gained residency, they went on to better jobs. There was also an amnesty for people who had come prior to 1982 and remained illegally in the United States. And that was, maybe Europeans who had overstayed their visas. It was also a lot of the people that were fleeing wars and conflict situations around the world. In 1990, the diversity visa lottery program was begun. The purpose behind it, well, it was started primarily to benefit the Irish because it was thought there hadn't been sufficient Irish immigration, and in fact, a large number of those initial visas were relegated to the Irish. Thereafter, though, it was opened up to the entire world, and anyone without any connection to the United States, as long as they had at least a high school education and 2 years job experience in a skilled field, or if they had a college degree, were eligible to get a diversity visa. And this is how you manage for the very first time to get people that are now being called terrorists from Uzbekistan or Afghanistan or places perhaps in South America that didn't have too many people here. It's 50,000, well, it could be up to 55,000 visas. Now it's 50,000. And basically it was a good-hearted attempt to end preferences for Northern Europeans. TPS, that was started primarily in the 1990s to benefit people whose countries were suffering from environmental disasters or ongoing armed conflicts. And these had to be people who were already in the United States. You couldn't apply for it from outside. And it has benefited people from southern Sudan, Syria, Yemen, Haiti, Honduras, El Salvador. This is one of the programs that, like the diversity visas, the Republicans want to do away with. And more recently, of course, you have DACA and DAP, and I won't go into that because I think all of you know what that is. But there is one important point to be made about that. To apply for any of these programs, like temporary protected status or DACA, you have to first reveal your undocumented status to the Immigration Service. So it's an act of faith. So, when you have an idiot like Kelly talking about people too lazy to apply for DACA, no, they're too afraid.
Yeah.
DACA means deferred action, against deportation. It's a temporary status. Extreme vetting was mentioned. That's ridiculous. People are so vetted by the time they come to the U.S. You can't imagine. To get an non-immigrant visa, even a visitor's visa, if you're not from one of the European countries, if you're coming from Mexico, for instance, and your whole family is here in legal status, you're not likely to get a visa because you might stay. So there is vetting going on all the time. I could go into more of this, but my major point is these policies have never been great. They've been a lot worse at different times in our country. But what we're talking about are white nationalist policies. And it's only become more evident now because Trump is dumb enough to make these statements that show his hand. I also wanted to mention, because people have asked, and Stephanie had asked too, we're very lucky in San Francisco. There is a rapid response network. There is a number. I urge you actually to go to the San Francisco San Francisco Immigrant Legal and Educational Network. You can just Google it. They have all kinds of resources. They have Know Your Right cards. They have information about a number to call if you see a raid action. Mass action when there is raids is not really something that's very viable because the raids that happen on homes often happen at 5 or 6 in the morning, and by the time anyone could get there, those people are going to be taken to jail. You might have workplace actions or raids that go on longer, but still it's not a realistic idea to plan on showing up for that. But if you have numbers to call, you can get them on the website, you can give them to people. I didn't get, Lulu, are you with Mujeres Unidas? Okay, Mujeres Unidas de Activas has a fantastic program to educate people in the community about their rights. And they go out on the street and they give out information, they have workshops, and they also come out at every demonstration. We were there, I work with the Women's March too, for the Day Without an Immigrant last March. So we can talk about other things that might be done, but know that at least in the Bay Area, in San Francisco and Alameda County, we do have good resources. Just in the last 2 years, last couple of years, now the Public Defender's Office, we've got Francisco Ugarte there, who helps immigrants that have criminal convictions and so on. I'm going to stop now.